All right, let's get right into it. When you have a government with a really powerful president and a Congress making all the laws, who's the one to say, hang on, that's going too far? That's what we're digging into today. Who really is the final arbiter of power in the Philippines?
I mean, really think about it for a second. You've got the president, you've got Congress. That's a whole lot of power concentrated in two branches. So what stops them from just doing whatever they want? What's the safety net built into the system? Who gets to blow the whistle and say, nope, that's out of bounds?
Well, the answer is an institution that's literally designed to be the referee in this whole game of governance. We're talking, of course, about the judiciary, with the Supreme Court right at the top.
So you can think of the 1987 Constitution as the ultimate rulebook. It sets out what everyone's job is, what they can do, and what they can't do. But, a rulebook is only as good as the referee who calls the plays, right? When the big players disagree on the rules, somebody has to make the final call. And yup, that's exactly where the Supreme Court steps in.
Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Look at the specific words here from the Constitution. This isn't just about reading laws. The 1987 Constitution gave the court something called expanded judicial power. And the key phrase, the magic words, are grave abuse of discretion. You can think of it like a constitutional red card. The Supreme Court can pull this out when any part of the government just goes completely off the rails, acting with no legal basis whatsoever. It is, without a doubt, the ultimate shield against arbitrary power.
And here you go. This quote just nails it. It's from a huge case, Aralo versus Aquino, and it perfectly sums up the court's job. See, it says the judiciary is the final arbiter. They're not just another player on the field. They are the umpire who makes the final, definitive call on where the lines of power are drawn.
Okay, so this entire setup really rests on two big ideas. First, you've got separation of powers. That just means you slice the government into three separate, co-equal teams. The legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch carries them out, and the judicial branch interprets them. Simple enough. But then, to stop any one team from getting too powerful, you have checks and balances. This basically lets each team keep the others in check, and the Supreme Court's power to review laws and actions, that is the biggest check of them all.
So all this theory is great, but what does it actually look like in the real world? Let's jump into a really famous and, very controversial example of the Supreme Court putting a check on the power of Congress.
You've probably heard of this one, the PDAF, or as pretty much everyone called it, the pork barrel. For a long, long time, this was a massive part of the national budget. The way it worked was, after the big budget law was passed, individual lawmakers got these lump sum funds, and they could say, okay, use my share to build this road, or fund that program. As you can imagine, this gave them a ton of influence back in their districts.
But then, back in 2013, the whole system got a major legal challenge. And in this huge case, Baliga versus Ochoa, the Supreme Court dropped a bombshell. It declared the PDAF unconstitutional. Their logic was super clear. They said, look, Congress's job is to make the law, in this case the budget. But by picking specific projects after the law was already passed, they were jumping over the line and doing the executive's job of, executing the law. The court said this completely blurred the separation of powers, and just like that, with one decision, they totally reshaped the budget process and changed the game for how much power individual lawmakers have.
Okay, so the court checked Congress. Fair enough. But what about the executive branch, the office of the president? Does the same rule apply? Well, you bet it does. Let's look at another really high-profile case.
This one was called the Disbursement Acceleration Program, or DAP. The idea behind it was actually pretty simple: speed up government spending. So, the executive branch could take money that other agencies hadn't spent yet, call it savings, and then move that money over to other projects they thought were more important.
But just like with the pork barrel, people started asking, wait a minute, are they allowed to do that? Where's the limit? And guess what? In that same Aralo versus Aquino case we mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court had to step in and draw that line. And what they found was that, the president has some leeway with the budget, but the way DAP was being used, it just went too far.
And here's the key thing to understand. The court didn't say the whole idea of boosting the economy was bad. No, they got really specific. They said you can't just declare something savings when an agency still has the whole rest of the year to spend that money. And this was the really big one. You absolutely cannot take money from the executive branch and give it to another branch, like Congress or the courts. They called this a cross-border transfer and said it was a flat-out violation of the separation of powers. Man, that decision sent a huge message. Even the president has to follow the rules when it comes to the nation's budget.
All right, for our last example,
let's talk about something that is maybe the most political process there is: impeachment. For a really long time, the common thinking was that this was a purely political fight. You know, something the courts couldn't and shouldn't touch.
Well, that whole idea was turned on its head. In a major decision involving impeachment proceedings, the Supreme Court made something crystal clear. They said, yes, impeachment is political, obviously. But first and foremost, it is a legal process, and that means it has to follow the rules of the Constitution.
And this ruling had some serious, real-world consequences. The court basically laid down the law. Number one, impeachment isn't just a political free-for-all. It has to follow the constitutional script. Number two, the person being impeached still has rights, like the right to due process. And number three, that ultimate check we keep talking about, grave abuse of discretion, yep, it applies to impeachment too. This means the Supreme Court can actually step in and review the process to make sure it wasn't just completely arbitrary. This was a game changer, proving that even the most intense political showdowns are still under the rule of law.
I love this quote from the court's press release about that decision. There is a right way to do the right thing at the right time. It just perfectly captures the spirit of the ruling, doesn't it? It's this powerful reminder that fairness and the rule of law matter, especially when the stakes are at their highest.
So when you step back and look at all these examples, the pork barrel, the budget savings, even impeachment, what's the common thread? What's the one big idea that connects all of them? Well, it all boils down to one simple core constitutional principle.
And here it is, straight from Article 11 of the Constitution. Public office is a public trust. It sounds simple, but it's so profound. It means that no government job, not even the presidency, is a personal belonging. It's a trust given to them by the Filipino people. And with any trust, the most important thing is accountability.
And that right there brings us right back to the beginning, when the Supreme Court struck down the PDAF, when it put limits on the DAP, and when it said even impeachment has to follow the rules. It was acting as the ultimate guardian of that public trust. It's their job to make sure that every branch of government, no matter how powerful it gets, never forgets who's really in charge: the people, as spoken through the Constitution.
But of course, this all leads to a much bigger and honestly a fascinating question that never really goes away. The court sets up the legal guardrails, right? But inside those guardrails, the president and Congress still have to make tough policy choices. So where do you draw the line? Where does the court's job of interpreting the law end and the political job of the other branches begin? Finding that balance, that's the constant challenge, the dynamic tension of any healthy democracy. And it's a debate that is always shaping the nation.